going to migrate on to our next speaker. I'm so excited to introduce Mrs. Rachel Simpson. She's going to talk to us about designing for gender equity. And so, Rachel, let's talk about you for a moment. You're a senior designer. You've got 10 plus years experience working with some really great award-winning design agencies. You've done some work at some incredible groundbreaking startups and even some things on teams at Google since 2013. You've got some really great products on your resume there. So that's really, really exciting. So some of your other clients and collaborators include Seth Godin, BMW, Drive Now, Doctors Without Borders, and Freeletics. So great, resume obviously showing we've got a great qualified speaker here. So super excited to have you. Let's see here. If you want to go ahead and pop your screen up so that we can take a look at the goodness that you have to share, and we'll just let you run. Talk to us about designing for gender equity.
Lovely. Thanks for the warm welcome, Katie. I appreciate it. And hopefully folks are starting to see my screen. I know that techs have kindly gotten that in shape. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for being here today. I appreciate it from, I'm sure, all over the world. Katie, did you say you're in Austin?
I am indeed.
That's fantastic. Well, thank you. And thank you, everyone. So as Katie kindly said, I'm Rachel. I'm a UX designer at Google, and I'm really excited to share some of this work with you today. The talk I'm bringing takes a lot of its insights from a report called Towards Gender Equity Online, which is a product of 3 years of really deep research, foundational research on gender equity within products, which was conducted by other people at Google who I've had the pleasure of working closely with over the years. And I'll also be pulling some ideas and examples from Carolyn Criado Perez's book called Invisible Women, which is actually on sale today. I just saw someone tweeted that it's like 99p right now if you're in England, and it's a great deal for that book. So yeah, those are two of my big resources, and I really encourage you to take a look at them. Before I get started, I think it's really, really important to say that there are still some very big gaps here. So the report and the book and my work that I'm focusing on here over the past years mainly emphasizes 2 genders rather than being inclusive of all genders, which is very unfortunate and is due to gaps in the data, which some folks are already starting to work to close, which is great to see. But I think that's really important to call out here, and I'm happy to chat more about that. And of course, it's also really important to note that the talk itself is looking at in a more focused way at gender specifically and women in particular, but there are also a myriad of intersectional considerations that we should be taking into account when designing. And I'll touch on those very lightly, but I won't have time to deep dive into those today. So those are all of the really important notes and caveats. But yeah, I'm going to go ahead and dig into my talk, and look forward to speaking with all of you in the Q&A. So yeah, as we already said, hi, I'm Rachel. I've been at Google for about 8 years working on products like Chrome and Search. And in that time, my focus has been mainly on users in emerging markets. And there's a lot of overlap between that work and our work on developing products for better gender equity. So that's some context that you can think about when you're sort of trying to place this work. But I'm going to start my talk today with a story that I think everyone can quite easily relate to. These are some emojis. We're all probably pretty familiar with those. But what many people don't know, or what actually probably many of you in the room do know, is that the worldwide set of emojis is defined by a group called the Unicode Consortium, which is based in the Bay Area. And they're responsible for adding emojis to the set. And in particular, what they do is they add like a name to the set. So they give them a gender neutral code like police officer or runner. And that's what they do. And then platforms will interpret the names of those emojis into their own visual style. And one of the things that they noticed over the years, giving these gender neutral codes, was that they started to see a lot of gender skew into their intended to be gender neutral emoji set. So here's one example where you can see writing the "she's the CFO" would give you the CFO emoji, and unfortunately that would not cover both genders. So in 2016, they decided based on this to explicitly define 2 genders for each emoji. since they'd seen that this gender neutral stance had contributed to a more male skewed emoji set, or a sort of stereotypically gendered set. And because of this change, female options are now exist for all professions and all athletes. Some more good progress to see, Google also launched a third gender option to Android as well. So there's still work to do here in this space, but I think this story mainly serves to illustrate quite an important point, which is a little tongue-in-cheek, but hey guys, default male thinking, it's a thing. So this idea comes from Carolyn Criado Perez's work, but I think it's important to reflect on as designers, because often when we're designing, we're not designing explicitly for a man or for a woman or for a trans person or for any particular gender. We just think of it being as kind of a gender neutral user. But unfortunately, when we design in this default or in this way, we can often tend to skew into this sort of more default male thinking, where maybe we're not checking our assumptions as much as we should be. And this means that we can miss things. So we might end up creating products that are less relevant for women. We can end up compromising people's privacy and safety. And ultimately for businesses, we can miss out on user groups who we would otherwise like to serve and serve well. And so this is kind of a core topic. But I think that this topic actually relates to something we see as a pattern across digital products, which is that there is a gender gap. And we see a gender gap in online usage, and we see it in the users of certain technologies. Just a few quick facts here. So we know that more men are online than women in about 2/3 of the world's countries, by a substantial amount in some cases. India is a market I work in often, and there only about 1/3 of internet users are women. So here's a map of what that actually looks like, the online gender gaps around the world. This data comes from the Mobile Gender Gap Report from GSMA. And globally, on average, it's about a 26% gap. So you can see it varies significantly depending on the country. So you in your own product, working on your own designs, might see a gender gap or may not see a gender gap. But it might appear in different parts of your product as well, even if it's not significant in your market. So one important question you can already start asking is, do you have just gender disaggregated metrics to tell you if this is the case? So I think this is some of the most common thing I've been seeing, is that a lot of products don't have the ability, or don't have the, haven't built in the ability to identify where they might be losing users of certain genders. So I think that's a valuable thing to push on, depending on your product. And there's some important caveats and nuances there. But broadly, I think there's a huge opportunity for us to close this gap. So I want to start by kind of, as I dig into this, illustrating the quote with the gap with a particular quote. So this comes again from the Toward Gender Equity online report. And Maria Inez says, "If I go online in the middle of the night, my boyfriend says, 'Who was writing to you so late? It's not a proper time to be online.' And now I don't go online so much." So, I think this speaks to an important point, which is we're aware of the metrics. We can gender disaggregate our data and understand where the gaps, lie. But not only, do we need to do our due diligence in terms of the metrics to create equitable products and understand the gaps, we also need to start to understand and acknowledge social and cultural norms in the countries where we work, and understand how we can engage with those in a nuanced way, or choose not to in some cases. Okay, so as I dig into this hairy topic, the three main themes I want to speak to are about being welcoming, creating private products, and ensuring the safety of your users. So when I talk about creating something welcoming, your user should feel that this is made for them. This is designed with their needs in mind. Second, that the product is private, so they should feel that their information is protected, that they are protected from people who they don't want to see their information. And safe, so they don't need to feel that they're always alert. They don't need to be wary and always afraid that something bad is going to happen. Okay, so just to dig into these a little bit more, creating welcoming products, there's some core principles here that I think are really derived from the work that we've done. The first is about information. So if your product serves information to users, you need to think about access to that information across genders. So if you're dealing, for example, with any medical topics or educational topics, if you're dealing with anything that that people might not feel comfortable speaking about, you might need to take extra steps to be sure that your information is serving your users. So here, you need to ensure that access to information that only women may need can be accessed, and that they can find it even if it's being perhaps euphemistically described. So in some of our research, we saw that when women are interested in information about sexual health or their body, they may struggle to find the vocabulary to describe that in the terms that medical professionals, for example, may use. So that's something you may need to think about and dig into further. When it comes to interests, so content for all interests needs to be served, not just stereotypically masculine or feminine. I see this really commonly with feminine interest types not being served. So maybe your news is covering sports really well, but isn't covering fashion trends, for example. That's very stereotypical. But I've also seen, for example, complaints when we're serving fresh beauty content that male users are expecting that they're also going to be getting beauty and fashion tips, and they're not receiving that information. So really listening to your users and ensuring that you're offering complete coverage around interests independent of stereotypes, I think is really important. And then lastly, representation. So it's critical that everyone sees themselves in the product. And in terms of illustrations and photos and representation, it should also be literal. I think that's quite important to highlight here. So whether you're ensuring that gender identity, skin color, and skin tone and location or ethnicity is represented in your product, I think it's really important to think carefully about that coverage. It's something that we've struggled with a lot when dealing with sort of products that are built for certain user groups, and we want to ensure that there are photos of women in India in bridal situations and not just women in North America in bridal situations. It's quite a different image, and people can't relate to it if it doesn't resonate with them. So I'll share another quick story here. So when we talk about default male thinking, I think it's not always easy for us immediately to imagine all the ways that this might manifest in our products. It covers a lot of different surfaces, but if you're not dealing with a specific type of product, you might not be aware of it immediately. So I'll share the story about Apple. They launched their health monitoring system in 2014, and it still is very comprehensive. You can input your blood pressure, steps taken, blood alcohol level, even selenium and copper intake are possible to input into this app. So it's extremely complete. However, unfortunately, when they launched, they forgot to include something quite critical, which is a period tracker. And that's a pretty big gap. But when I practiced this talk initially and I told my partner this story, I expected him to be sort of annoyed as I was by this revelation. And instead he asked me, actually, is that really important? And what I realized is that, a team of people who don't personally have experience with menstruation might not understand the important role it plays in one's health and the need to keep track of it and understand how it changes over time. So of course, now Apple has responded to what was a fairly strong backlash at launch, and they've added that feature, and it's available to use, and it's great. But I think this is a really good example of how not understanding the lived bodily experiences of women and people who menstruate can cause us to miss things. And then, taking this one step further, I think is another question that is, how does this gender neutrality or this approach of a gender neutral designer manifest in a world where there are many of our design decisions are made by algorithm? This is a quote from John Maeda. I think it's quite John Maeda, but he says, computational design makes big data, and that makes it need thick data to combat scaled biases. So what does this actually mean? A lot of products today are relying on training data to make decisions. And of course, if you have a gender gap in your training data, that's going to skew what it learns. So the gender gap creates a skew in the data. For countries with a big gap like India, there might be more than twice as many male data points as female data points. And this matters a lot when we start to rely on data to help us decide what content to show or how our product should behave. So I'll just give you a few examples of what this actually looks like, because I think it's a little difficult to grok at first glance. So here, this is a really great example from the Translate team. I really love the work they've done here. So what they were seeing is that their translations were reflecting biases in their training data. So basically here, this is an example from Turkish, O bir doktor. So here, this is a gender neutral description of someone is a doctor, they are a doctor. Excuse me, my Turkish is not great, but the point is here that they were receiving this translation, he is a doctor, which was not correct. It was not a gendered statement. So in order to address this bias, they've started by working to show multiple gender alternatives for translations, starting with single words and short phrases for high priority languages. And I know they're working to progress these pieces because of course it's an endless and deep and complex task that manifests very differently across different kinds of languages. You can ask me all sorts of questions about the adventure of learning German and translating all sorts of things into gendered topics. Okay. This is another example where the data sources and the algorithms that are serving them are letting our users down. So this is a screenshot of our search results when you search for hairstyles in Nigeria. It was provided for me by one of our researchers there. And unfortunately, it's problematic for a number of reasons. So if you're a Nigerian woman or man just searching for a hairstyle, this is probably not serving your functional needs. You know, these aren't hairstyles that are going to be useful to you. But also, it's problematic in terms of representation. You know, you're not seeing yourself in the results that we are serving. So in that vein, I think a great example of a feature that does this better is the skin tone picker in Pinterest. So what they serve is a number of different skin tones when you search for makeup or other relevant topics. And that allows you to select a skin tone that's going to allow Pinterest to provide relevant results for you. Another great example of this work in terms of making users feel welcome in your product comes from Duo. So they were seeing in their research a number of issues around skin tones and around low light calling, which is a major pain point, in particular for users in places where electric lighting remains a challenge or can be frequently interrupted due to power outages, which overlaps a lot with the users who we're serving as well. So what they did was really, really deep work to improve the way that their rendering would serve users across different lighting conditions and skin tones. And the takeaway was huge. You know, they saw improved metrics, and the metrics were improved for everyone, not just people in single bulb homes, but anyone who wanted to say goodnight before bed. This is a really great example and a bit of a foreshadowing to my conclusion, which is about, you know, the ability to design better for everyone by thinking about specific groups of users and making sure we're meeting their specific needs. Okay, so I want to start to talk about privacy, which is obviously quite a complex topic at every moment in time, especially now. But I think it's worth highlighting what is kind of a different context for the users that we serve in emerging markets, which I think also likely manifests for many users around the world. But in India, for example, device sharing is extremely common. 29% of Indian women borrow a device for their primary access, and 39% share their device at least once a month. So it's quite common. And I think that there's sort of an underlying expectation of sharing and a desire to share. I think women in particular, though, have the inability to refuse family members. There's this idea of privacy is not necessarily always something women have a right to. There's complexity here. A lot of people use app lock, for example, but it begs the question of, you know, why do you have a lock on this app and what do you have to hide? So there's a little bit of interesting kind of nuanced navigation that women are doing in this space. And one of the ways that they do navigate that in a nuanced way is that they delete a lot of their traces retroactively. One of the things I was really surprised and impressed to see in my research was that users who are very new to using devices, like having their first smartphone only in the last few months, already knew how to delete their history from Chrome or from search, when many users in other countries that I've done research with might not have picked that up. So I think it speaks to sort of how women are kind of walking that tightrope and, getting access to information, but navigating cultural norms and expectations placed upon them. So this is an example of that. When I watch a video that's a little bit not nice, then I search for 5 to 6 other videos on different topics to remove it. So again, users seeing how the system works and reacting to that to serve their needs, rather than us necessarily reacting to serve their needs in the way that we should be. We see this a lot in our own research. I think this is an interesting example. So incognito mode in Chrome and YouTube, as I said, were already fairly known. But I think in our research, what we've seen is that, especially for newer users, it can be really beneficial to make these kinds of modes much more immediately accessible and much more obvious. So here you can see Maps, as an example, making this incognito mode much more obvious. It should be very clear to users what this does. This is something that's a real challenge and isn't always obvious to date. I think a lot of users still need to learn what this means. And one of the things we saw that's quite important is we need to present this maybe in a less judgmental way. It shouldn't seem like something shady to want to have privacy within your own device. So yeah, yep. This is another really big challenge when it comes to privacy, especially for women. A major driver of fear for women online is the risk of having their image stolen and then potentially photoshopped in compromising ways. So here's a quote from one of the participants, Lavinia. She says, "I'm afraid that my photo will get copied and circulated in men's private groups. I don't put up my face on social apps." So again, this kind of speaks to the idea that women are working around the way that products have been designed, that they may not engage because they don't feel safe. A really good example of a product that addresses this is Facebook's profile picture guard, which they have launched in India and other markets. It basically prevents screenshotting of people's image or photos and helps them feel protected from abuse like identity theft, photomorphing, and revenge porn. This quote speaks to a similar issue, or the same issue really. It says, "Sharing a girl's picture online may not be a big deal for US people, but a fully clothed photo can lead to suicide here in conservative regions of Pakistan." And I think this quote is a really important one to share because it speaks to the way that privacy and our need to protect people's privacy translates into our responsibility to protect people's safety. The way that the sort of physical world can manifest, the digital world can manifest in the physical world. And that brings me to the topic of safety, and I think probably the most serious topic. And just to highlight this, I will speak about harassment and some perhaps triggering topics in this section. So if folks want to take a break, now's a good time. So yeah, what is our responsibility when it comes to our users? Well, the first here is to protect our users from abuse and harassment, both in the digital world and in the physical world as it manifests online. So risks we might encounter here include cyber stalking, impersonation, leaking of personal information or content, which could lead to risks in the physical world. So all of these are topics we have to be aware of. And again, they apply across all genders. So here, another quote that speaks to harassment from Valentina. She says, "I write a beauty and diet blog, and I often get dick pics and sex messages in the comments. Sometimes I regret having the blog." So here, in this very unfortunate example, harassment and being made to feel unsafe in a space that she has created for herself is leading to her limiting herself, limiting her behavior, and limiting her engagement online. And this really matters. It matters in terms of our online communities. It matters in terms of our the spaces that we are responsible for in our products and for our users, obviously. Another unfortunate type of harassment that women face is phone harassment. This is really common in the markets that we address. So this is the risk that someone will get your phone number or guess your phone number and call you and harass you over the phone. And we've seen this manifest in our work or in other teams at Google's work. So we saw with Stations Wi-Fi that women using the service were voicing concerns about sharing their phone number to access the Wi-Fi. because they didn't know how it would be used or whether it would be safe. Fortunately, they discovered this in their research, and Station was able to revise their onboarding flow to reassure users and explain how the number would be used. And they saw some improvements as a result of that. Okay, so I think this example is probably the most challenging. This speaks to an assault which was perpetrated in a VR space. So Jordan Bellemere, she was playing a product or a game called QuiVR on the HTC Vive, and it was her first time playing, and another player sort of sexually assaulted her in the space. And I think I've been asked the question, is this a really, what kind of experience is this? Is this a serious experience? And in particular for this person, they had been previously assaulted in real life. And so not only was it a very negative experience of the game, but it also recalled a personally traumatic experience. And it's especially unfortunate in the context of this product because the creators of HTC Vive had actually considered, had thought to prevent other players from cheating by covering each other's eyes. So they actually implemented a feature that would protect players from this and would kind of hide the hands of another player if they went to cover someone's eyes. But they hadn't thought to extend that sphere to cover the rest of the player's body. So of course, after this awful experience, they've gone ahead and extended that feature to protect players. But it's yet another example of how not having the lived bodily experience of women on the team means that the team hasn't considered or discovered the possibility of this serious risk to their users. Okay, moving on to my last example, and perhaps a bit more of a positive example. I think we're all aware that physical safety for women, for all genders, really is a global concern. And in particular, 35% of women have experienced physical or sexual violence. And one of the ways the Maps team has seen this play out in their products is that they would frequently see women passengers monitoring their location manually via Google Maps to see if a driver that they are driving with is going in the right direction, in the expected direction. So one of the things they did to ease their users' concerns is that Maps designed this feature which automatically alerts users if there's a significant route deviation while driving and allows them to easily share their live trip with friends or family. And there are other great examples of this as well. India's Red Bus has bus ratings, location tracking, emergency contacts, and even reserved seats for women. So I think they're currently exploring a lot of different approaches, and I think it's not a solved problem. But I'm really pleased to see these kinds of explorations. And I believe that features like this make everyone safer, not just certain groups. Which I think brings me to my conclusion, which is something I think we've seen historically across design. Designing for specific groups helps us understand problems in a much deeper and more nuanced way. And designing for the few is design for the many. And that's where I'd like to leave it today. That's all, folks. So yeah, really happy to answer any questions that you have. Please feel free to share them in the chat. I know Katie is going to be moderating for me. And please feel free to tweet at me. I'm at Rylan on Twitter, and happy to hear from you there too. So thank you.
That was fantastic. Thank you so much, Rachel. What a powerful topic. Some very real talk that you approached with us, which is very refreshing and great to hear. Also, some very sobering statistics in there. So very, very eye-opening. And it's really great to hear, especially with a lot of your examples from Google, how seamlessly you've been able to navigate some of those issues that, to where I might have not even known if I was, being detrimented by one of those. And then I actually have something that's already there to help me with it. So really, really cool. We've got some excellent questions popping up in our Q&A over here. So encourage anybody to go pop in there. Also, before I get started, we'll have a poll pop up briefly to ask you how you felt about Rachel's talk and how helpful it was. So keep an eye out for that. But up first, this person actually was thinking in the same brain that I was. So typically when you do user research, there's a lot of, talking to people, like as a designer, there's a lot of talking to people, or there's a lot of looking at different web metrics and things like that, kind of studying those kinds of patterns. A lot of this stuff does not come out in common conversation, or, maybe people don't realize it's even happening, things like that. So the question we got is, are designers involved in some of this ethnographic research in your team? Or is that something that a research team does and they share their findings to you?
It's a fantastic question, and I think it gets at a number of different things. Thank you so much, Katie, for fleshing it out as well. I think it touches on a number of points, so I'll try to address them. I think the first one is, are the designers involved in the ethnographic research? On our team, the answer is yes, we're closely involved. We have a fantastic team, research leads here in London, as well as different teams that we work with in the countries on the ground where we're working depending on where our focus is at a given time. I think what's been important is, so first of all, yes, working really closely. In fact, not just designers being involved with the research, but also engineers, product managers, stakeholders, getting people to experience it in person as much as possible, while the second point, being able to navigate the different complexities and nuanced topics that we're trying to get at. So not all of our research is focused on gender equity necessarily, though a significant portion of it has been in the past. And I think there are a lot of things you need to do when you're trying to get at some of these more taboo topics. We've had a number of different approaches on our team, and I can't take credit for any of them. A lot of them come from different folks. One that I think worked quite well came from one of our interns at the time and one of our other designers. They created focus groups. They were specifically looking at taboo topics and wanted to have a deeper understanding of the way that women were censoring themselves, searching for information or not searching for information. The way that they did this, and actually the MAPS team has done some similar work in the past, the way that they did this was they created sort of a focus group is the wrong word, but they created a group of women, and rather than sort of coordinating them or pushing them through a series of questions, they did more of a facilitated conversation, and they specifically chose facilitators sort of a similar age group and from similar communities, so that they were able to kind of have more safe space conversations. I think it's worth noting the way that we can present as members of the team, as researchers. I think there's a lot that you can do to help improve the situation if you feel like there's sort of this obvious gap manifesting. In the past, Sashwati, I'm forgetting her last name, that's so awful. Sashwati, who worked closely with from Search, she's currently working at WhatsApp, but she shared a lot of expertise around not bringing your laptops into the room if you're working with different socioeconomic groups. Bringing in a bunch of laptops seems really tone deaf and unaware, or being aware of what kind of branding you're showing on your clothing, what kind of clothing you're wearing. Being aware that if you're doing research around women and taboo topics, that having many men in the room from a different community might not be an effective way of getting them to tell you really potentially private information. So I think there's a lot you can do to improve, but I think also working closely with people from the communities that you're trying to reach is probably the most powerful way that you can go about doing that. Katie, did I answer that question fully? Anything I've
Absolutely
touched on there?
No, that was fantastic. I mean, we as designers, obviously very well understand the value of research and hearing from our users and whatnot, but what a great way to really remind you, like, the way you approach that research is very important too, depending on the kinds of information that you're trying to find out from people. So thank you very much for that. Let's see here. Up next. This one was really great too. I was excited. So for widely used Google apps, do you actually design a localized version across different cultures and regions? And if so, what kind of part of that experience is usually customized versus kind of, I guess, standard?
Yeah, great question. I'm afraid the answer is really complex and nuanced, and I can only speak to a few corners of the company, but I can speak a little bit to this, which is that I think generally when trying to scale across many places, we sort of strive to make a simple and consistent experience, which breaks down completely when you're talking about locally relevant content. Languages are a major topic. And actually, I think those are the two main things: locally relevant content and languages. There may be other details and nuances that I think manifest in the design that people already know of. Things like left to right versus right to left languages, things like when you have a voice, if your voice has the right accent, I think can be quite important. And we see when we invest more in localizing, but not just in terms of language, but also culture, relatability, dialect, and accent, for example, those details really matter to people. This can also manifest in things like in your products, like images. I think that can be really difficult to get right, and it's something that we've worked a lot with our internal image service to provide feedback around how we can do that more at scale. So yeah, I think a lot of the complexity tends to come from scale and making sure that, you know, when our experience is very much based on, for example, user-generated content, are we reaching a diverse set of users, and do we have good base of users in that country to provide that content that's going to be relatable for people? So yeah, there's a lot of complexity there. I've done a bit of a broad answer, but hopefully that gets at some of it.
I can't even imagine how many layers. You've broken it down pretty well. This is good. All right, they keep coming. Here's another one. Is there a recommended research method or maybe some sort of a checklist that you could use, or for a product design team to be able to make sure that the things that they're working on, the designs that they're doing, are good and, you know, equitable from a gender equity perspective?
Well, that's a great question. I don't know of a good checklist, but maybe that means I should write one. But I'll poke
if we
around.
can just download your brain, that would be great.
I'll just do that. That's fantastic. I love that. But I think there is something you can do that builds it in, which is, I've often seen that teams it's not always as easy as one would like to have a perfect gender split in your research. So if your product is sort of a non-gendered or non-gender specific product, it's really important to make sure that you're covering at least 2 genders in your research. Ideally, more gender diversity would be better. I say that because you know, I think if you want to have a better understanding of all genders, it can be useful to have specialized research around that topic to make sure you're reaching people. But the bare minimum that I think everyone can be doing is to make sure that at least 2 genders are being represented in your research to start. That means that you can kind of get at more of the nuances that people might encounter. It's also important to think about ways to kind of probe on that in the research, and that might mean that, you know, making sure that you have researchers of both gender asking, or of 2 genders asking people at least, and again, kind of trying to unpack that more as much as you can. But yeah, beyond the privacy, safety, and welcoming checklist, I'll take that away. I think it's an interesting question, maybe something I can do about that.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's fantastic. No, I think, and it sounds like, you know, a good kind of message that I'm taking away from a lot of the things that you're saying about research too, is like, there are so many different aspects that you could almost probably worry yourself to death trying to make the perfect research study. But it sounds like, you know, do not, you know, use that as something that deters you from going and pursuing that research. Still, yes, definitely, exactly. You know, do what you can to find out what you can, and we'll, you know, every day we learn more.
Yeah, I really dig that. I think it definitely is important to keep incrementally improving. And like, even at Google, with a lot of resources, there's still a ton to do. And I think everyone can kind of be making progress there. I'm still working on learning everything I can, and it's only the surface. So
love it. I can only imagine. It's kind of a big company, right? That's great. Let's see here. Okay, I'm going to ask another one. We've got some good ones going here. Probably shouldn't, but let's see here. Do you think social media or other sorts of media might be 100% safe for women? Is there any place that a woman can go and feel, you know, 100% safe?
Yeah, this is a great question. I think the answer is, while we can do a lot to design our products to be more safe for women, and we should do all of that, I think there's still work to do in our culture as well, right? I think that's a big part of it. There's only so much we can do to fight culture, and we should do all of those things. But I also think that it's beyond just our products, that we need to be kind of pushing against, you know, violence against women, and the way that misogyny manifests for men, and the expectations that have been created for them, that I think make it hard to connect with people of other genders. You know, there's so much there to unpack, and so much nuance, and you know, it is only scratching the surface to design a product that tries to protect women from that. But yeah, there's a lot that can be done to protect women, And I think it's beyond just, creating a block feature or an incognito feature. I think there's also work to be done in the way that we kind of curate our communities. The creator of Reddit, I think, has written a lot about this idea, as well as a number of other kind of community creators. And I think it's not something that we do especially well at Google. We don't have a lot of sort of social media products besides the nameless one. But I think that it's something we as designers should kind of invest in. The content and that community are part of the product. In fact, they are the product. And so we are responsible for digging into those as well.
Absolutely. What a great answer to wrap this up too. Talking about how it's not just, we don't just let the products and the social media that we use handle all of these issues for us, but is also on us as well to help, kind of perpetuate good practices and just things within our own society ourselves. So thank you so much, Rachel. This has been very eye-opening and insightful.